We have probably heard a lot that humans are social creatures. We live in groups, work together, and even create rules to make life easier. But humanity's journey also has a dark side: war, which might have stained our history with blood for hundreds and even thousands of years. Around this year, history recorded a hidden war that was incredibly terrifying. In this war, there was a group that was brutally attacked. Those who were already dying were left to die slowly. Corpses were torn apart. There were even some who drank their own enemy's blood. But it turns out the perpetrators were not humans, but rather chimpanzees. Yeah, our closest relatives, whom we once thought lived peacefully. This is the Chimpanzee War in East Africa. It all started with split amongst chimpanzee groups in Gombe National Park. Yeah, just like humans, chimpanzees are complex social creatures who live in groups. In Gombe, the chimps were divided into 3 big groups. Each had its own territory, feeding paths, and even its own leader. And every chimp in the group had different roles. Some searched for food, some took care of the young, and some just kind of tagged along. They were all led by a male chimpanzee whose job was to keep the peace, decide when to go foraging, and lead patrols to protect their territory. In return, he got special treatment. He was the first to eat, got groomed by others, and had the freedom to choose his mate. But getting to the top is never easy. The leader was usually the most influential chimp, like the biggest or the strongest. But the chimp who wanted to be in charge could also gain support by grooming others. Yeah, maybe you've seen similar tactics elsewhere. But in the chimp world, leadership is never guaranteed. A leader could be challenged to a duel at any time, and if he lost, his throne would be taken right away. Now, let's zoom in on this particular group, Kasakela, where things started to fall apart. The leader at the time was an old chimp who, although not that strong, was clever. He once used empty oil cans to make loud rumbling noises during a fight, scaring off even toughest rifles. But as the old king aged, a couple of younger males dared to challenge him, and they won. The throne was up for grabs. A chimp who won the fight against the old leader started claiming he was the new leader. But suddenly, these 2 brothers showed up, aiming for that same spot, though they could not compete with the rival chimp coalition. Feeling like there was no way to gain power, they started pulling away and isolating themselves in the southern part of Kasakela, and even gathered a few followers. Actually, this is pretty common in the chimp world. Big groups sometimes split into smaller groups, kind of like what happens with humans too. But this time, it was different. The brothers group started drifting further apart from the main group in the north. And maybe because they were scared and wanted to avoid a fight, the main group completely steered clear of the south. On the other hand, the chimps from the south did not seem scared at all, especially those 2 brothers. They often crossed into the north's territory. 2 years passed, and eventually the 2 sides fully became separate groups, each with its own leader. This was the southern group, the rebel group, Kahama. Slowly, the tension started to heat up. The main group, which had been keeping their distance, finally got bold enough to attack the rebels, led by their leader and his right-hand man. And then, war finally broke out. That day, the sky was clear. One rebel chimp was eating up in a tree, completely unaware that he was being hunted. Suddenly, the main group showed up and launched a surprise attack. He panicked and tried to leap away. But it was already too late. His body was slammed to the ground, his face was stepped on, and his legs were held tight so he could not escape. One by one, the rebels vanished. The main group went on patrols, hunting down unlucky rebel chimps. One day, they came across a familiar face, the former leader of the main group who was now leading the rebels, their childhood hero. But without hesitation, the former alpha was attacked, twisted, and beaten until he trembled, then left to suffer until he died. What made it even scarier was that many of the attacks were done in silence. Some chimps just kind of vanished. Others were found later, dead by the riverbank, with their bodies covered in brutal wounds, including the two brothers who had started the rebellion in the south. Even the female chimps were not spared. One older chimp, who realized she was being watched, tried to hide for a few days, but unfortunately, her location was tracked down by the main group's patrol. Just like the victims before her, she was beaten until she could not move and they just left her. But she still tried to crawl away, and it was her child who stayed by her side and took care of her until she took her last breath. In the end, all the chimps from the rebel group died. The last male held on for a year, all alone with no other males left. The main group kept hunting him down non-stop. When they finally found him, he was attacked so badly that his bones broke and he could not move anymore. As he lay there helpless, one of the chimps from the main group caught the blood dripping from his face and drank it, like it was a sign of victory for the main group, who had wiped out the rebels to the very last one. The Gombe Chimpanzee Civil War was over. This horrific story of the Gombe chimps was actually observed firsthand by researchers. At first, they wanted to study chimps because of how similar they are to humans, thinking that this research could help us understand early human behavior and human evolution. A well-known archaeologist at the time picked this woman, who actually did not have a formal education background to lead this research. At first, she believed the chimps were like peaceful versions of humans, social, affectionate, and not particularly prone to extreme violence. But the Gombe Chimpanzee War changed everything. Goodall even admitted that she had nightmares from studying the war. And after the Gombe War, experts found more chimp wars. Some even noticed that chimps use military-style tactics that humans use, such as taking high ground to gather info about enemy locations while also staying safe from attacks. All of this raised a huge question. Is violence just part of nature? Is war something we can never avoid? War between chimps does sound brutal and cruel. But today it's not claws, fangs, or revenge that threaten their lives. It's us, humans. We are the ones taking over their homes, even hunting chimps just for fun. What happened in Gombe also shattered our old belief that only humans were capable of violence. Just like us, chimps can have groups, politics, and even wage war. But maybe, like Jen Goodall said, the real difference is we have a choice to stop fighting each other and start living peacefully side by side.
The saddest part of learning all that is that it made them seem even more like us than they had before. I do believe we have innate aggressive tendency. I don't honestly think you can look around the world today and deny it. However, that doesn't mean that war is inevitable. That doesn't mean that we have to continue in this mold of aggression.